Hello and welcome. I'm Brent Glass, Interim Executive Director of the National Building Museum. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Equity in the Built Environment program. Equity in the Built Environment program is generously sponsored by Studios Architecture, and tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Sing Sing Prison Museum. The National Building Museum has a unique mission. We're the only cultural institution in the country dedicated to the built environment, to the places that we play, work, and live in. Our programs and exhibitions focus on major issues concerning the built environment: design and construction, sustainability and resilience, and social justice issues. And the Equity in the Built Environment series focuses on many of these issues. It's springtime at the National Building Museum. We reopened the museum on April 9th, and with new exhibitions, including Justice is Beauty, featuring the work of the Mass Design Studio, and also the Gun Violence Memorial Project, designed by the Mass Design Studio. The photography of Alan Karchmer, the architectural photography, is featured in a new exhibition. And we have a new visitor center designed by Wendy Joseph Studio, as well as old favorites, Animals Collected, and House and Home. And of course, we have the Great Hall of the Pension Building, our home for the last 40 years. So there's a lot to see at the museum, and we hope you come back and visit us often. We also have a new executive director. Eileen Fuchs will start next week as executive director, and we're very pleased to welcome her to the museum and to Washington, D.C. In addition to serving as interim executive director of the National Building Museum, I wear another hat, and that is as executive director of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. So I'm especially pleased that the Sing Sing Prison Museum is able to be a co-sponsor of tonight's event. The mission of the Sing Sing Prison Museum is to tell the extraordinary story of 200 years of incarceration at Sing Sing Prison, and also to challenge visitors to imagine a more equitable justice system and to take action to build a better society. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that we're able to co-sponsor this event featuring the work of Deanna Van Buren. In my estimation, Deanna Van Buren is charting a new path. It is one of the pioneers in addressing issues of justice and architecture, and we're very delighted to be a co-sponsor of tonight's program. Every chapter in America's criminal justice history has a few pages written at Sing Sing Prison. And one of the themes that we are exploring at the museum, which is under development in Ossining, is the history of architecture, the architecture of confinement. The first building at Sing Sing Prison was built by men who had been incarcerated at Auburn State Prison, who constructed their own cells beginning in 1825. And that building, the ruins of that building, still exist. The building was 476 feet long, 50 feet wide, an extraordinary building and a landmark to the history of mass incarceration in this country. As I say, that building's in ruins now, but it will be one of the main features in the visitor's experience when we open the Sing Sing Prison Museum in 2025. I want to take a moment to say a personal word of thanks to the National Building Museum. This is my last week as the interim executive director, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have been working with the museum during a important transitional period. I want to thank the board and the staff, who are just outstanding, extraordinary people who are dedicated to the mission of the museum, and during a period in which all museums, all cultural institutions have been challenged to be strategic and creative. I applaud the work of the staff and board of this museum, and it's been a great honor to have been on this journey for this past year and to have been the executive director during this period. I know we're going to be under very able leadership with Eileen Fuchs in the future. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Maisie Hughes, ASLA. Maisie Hughes is the co-founder of Urban Studio, a multidisciplinary studio based in Washington, D.C., committed to ensuring that all people have the means to create a vibrant, just, and healthy community.
At the Urban Studio, we center our work around 5 core values. Our first value, design as liberation, is based on the idea that good design not only provides beauty to the world, but the process of designing also transforms the designer and the built environment. More than just building great projects, design can be a process that frees our creative souls from the prison of the status quo. This is why we are so excited to introduce Deanna Van Buren. Her work is living proof that design can free us all, and she applies her skills to those systems that seek to incarcerate and alienate people in the most need of a road to redemption. Deanna holds a BS in architecture from the University of Virginia and a master's in architecture from Columbia University. She uses her work to challenge us all to rethink our assumptions around crime, punishment, and redemption. Deanna is the co-founder and executive director and design director of Designing Justice and Designing Spaces, an architecture and real estate development nonprofit based in Oakland, California. The firm's mission is to end mass incarceration by building infrastructure that addresses the root causes of what can entangle individuals in the criminal justice system, be it poverty, racism, or disparate access to education and resources. Deanna brings design to building and spaces that foster restorative justice, rehabilitation, and community building. Deanna's innovative and forward-thinking approach to design hits you right in your soul. And this is so unique. I'm honestly not sure America is ready for her. But ready or not, Deanna is here with us tonight to walk us through what a future without prisons could mean for architecture and for the world. Deanna?
Thank you, Maisie. You're making me want to cry a little bit. That was the best introduction I've ever had. You're so sweet.
I watched your TED Talk in preparation for today, and you made me cry, so we're even.
Deal. Great. Well, I'll get started. Let me share my screen with y'all. Hopefully this works well. Great. Can you see it okay?
Looks
awesome.
Good.
Awesome. So I always kind of start with my own personal journey, because I really think all the work that we do it's personal, right? We come from a place and it inspires us to do the things that we do. So in this image, you'll see me when I'm about 5, and you notice I don't look like the other kids. And one of the reasons is that when I was young, my family moved to rural Virginia, really in the wake of Jim Crow, right? So the Jim Crow South was still very much alive when I was little, and there was a lot of hostility being directed at us from all sides, right? But also from systems. And one system that my father always was clear to remind me of that I should never have anything to do with was our criminal justice system. And he would say it every time we went past the Stafford County Courthouse, right? The most expensive and biggest building in my community. And I would literally clench up. I was afraid of justice. I was told to be afraid of justice. And so amidst this climate, I would go and I would build spaces of refuge for myself. This was sort of my primary mode of self-care, right? So it's pretty obvious what I was going to end up being, but these were places where I felt safe, where I felt at peace. And it's a modality that I think is embedded in the way that I think about things in the work that we do. So as I'm making my huts, I grow up, right? And I decided to go to architecture school. And when I got there, this is what we were doing. We were making blobs. And I didn't want to make blobs. I didn't really get it. I wasn't getting it. And I'm in at Columbia, and I go outside to Harlem, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, wow, this is not okay, right? Black and brown people living in highly under-resourced communities. And I went back to the dean, and I was like, well, why are we making blobs? Now, people don't need blobs. why aren't we working in communities right next door to really support and create restorative environments for them? And he informed me that I was at the wrong school and I should just go somewhere else, right? So early coming up against sort of the academy and our professional establishment about what we do and what we don't do. And so I left the US. I was like, I'm out. And I traveled around the world, so fortunate, living and working in Europe and in Australasia and the Middle East, and exploring and seeing so many things. And during that time, I was really working for the 1%, right? These are some of the richest people in the world. I was working for the Al Ghurair family in Dubai. I was working for Bovis Lend-Lease, massive developers, doing very large mixed-use development projects, a lot of retail, right? And I was, I had a good job. It was fun. I was learning a lot of things about all different cultures and exploring the world. But at the same time, right, I was seeing this. I could not ignore the informal settlements I was seeing wherever I went. I couldn't ignore that the folks working on our construction projects were living in hovels. I was traveling in northern Thailand, watching people travel days to get medicine for their children. I traveled across our own country in the US and went to a lot of Native American reservations and saw how people were living there. And I had to start to ask myself, why am I doing this, right? What is the purpose of being an architect when I'm seeing so much gross structural inequity in the built environment, right? Manifested in the built environment. So I ended up doing something that my father told me not to do, right? I quit my job. I also had no money, by the way, and probably not the best strategy and solution, but it was the time. And I started to see how I could apply my skills and expertise as an architect to addressing the system, right? Going back to the system that was told was not for me. And so I became accountable to these folks. These were my new clients, right? Folks who were systems impacted in their communities of care, knowing that we have multiple generations of incarceration that have really led to the decimation of our Black and Brown communities and their families, right? It goes well beyond just those who are incarcerated. And a lot of people are like, well, what does architecture have to do with this? And I was like, architects manifest the philosophies of our society and the values and the beliefs of our society. So if we believe in punishment, we build it, right? And we're responsible for that, right? We're responsible for building and planning for the co-location of toxic land use. We are responsible for creating totally inadequate housing for communities and not resourcing them in the built environment. And so for me, the question was, if architecture, right, anchors and foments the beliefs of our society, then we can't make prettier versions of the prison or the jail or the courthouse. And I sort of positioned myself and the organization as abolitionists, and we ask ourselves, if we're not going to do that, what do we build instead of that? That question we ask every single day. And my early inspiration was restorative justice, right? I heard about this in 2007, that there was this other kind of justice no one had told me about, right? A justice that was being reignited around the world, an indigenous form of justice where those who've been harmed, their needs are addressed. And those who have done the harm are responsible, right? They're accountable for that. And that communities were coming together to actually resolve the harm, repair the breach, help people heal and move on, like everything from truth and reconciliation courts, which many of us know in South Africa. We see that happening in Sierra Leone, in Rwanda. We're starting to see victim offender mediation, right? This was being used in all kinds of harms. And so the question for me became like, well, why aren't we designing for this system, right? How do we do that? And I tried to do it by myself, like a lot of architects do, but I was fortunate that I was invited by a social worker to begin to engage those who have been most impacted by incarceration, those who have often been the ones who have done the harm and harmed themselves. And we started to run the country's first design studios around the intersection of restorative justice and design with currently incarcerated people. We worked with hundreds of these folks all over the country, and we learned incredible things. Right? We asked them, what kind of environments do you need to face the worst thing that's ever happened to you? What kind of environments do you need to be accountable? And the ideas were flowing, and I was starting to sort of see that through creative practice, right? Even just imagining these spaces, people were processing trauma, right? They were able to articulate the kind of vision for a world that we needed to see. And so I was fortunate at the same time to get a call from the Center for Court Innovation out of New York. who were saying, Deanna, because I've been bugging them for a couple of years, we do need to make spaces for restorative justice and peacemaking. And we are bringing Native American practices into a non-Native community for the very first time in the United States in the near west side of Syracuse. And what that looked like is that folks in the community, quality of life crimes, right? If someone took your purse or stole your car, those would get diverted out of court and into the community where elders in the community would moderate the conflict, right? And folks would come to an understanding of what needed to be done and they wouldn't go to court at all. And the Navajo Nation was helping with that. And they decided, yes, we can do this. And so my role really was like, how do I design a peacemaking center? What does that even look like, right? If I could see you all, I'd ask, like, has anyone ever been to one? Most people haven't. And I sure didn't know. So I got trained as a circle keeper. And I thought, well, if my design process can help teach the community what peacemaking looks like and is, I'll be able to help my client in two ways. So I did that. I did a process of role playing, understanding what people need. I was able to code and analyze that data to begin to understand what these environments had to be like. And I think we've learned over and over again that this kind of justice has to be local, right? It couldn't be downtown, right in the community. And we looked for a long time and knew it had to be on neutral territory, had to be close. And we found an old drug house that we were able to turn into the peacemaking center. And, fortunately for us, it's been successful. It's been open for about 4 or 5 years now. And what we've started to find, right, is that the environments that actually feel like we're coming home, right, that there's food for us, that there's relaxing spaces, there's light, there's art, there's color, there's warm textures and materials, that this environment had helping people to understand, that justice was for them, and that this was a thing they wanted to participate in, even though they never heard of it. And I talked to these folks last week, and the impact of the place and the program has been tremendous, far beyond anything I could have expected. They are now holding many circles. People are coming here voluntarily. The police are bringing folks here. People started having their birthday parties here and quinceañeras here, and then the kids are coming by, right? So it's become this hub for the community that has built incredible amounts of social cohesion. And that is what the power of place can do when you start to think of it, right? And start to think of these alternatives. And so I decided to scale up, right? I was like, okay, we did that. That was amazing. And we need more, right? There just needs to be more. So I was able to engage my city of Oakland with some of the country's best restorative justice practitioners, with the police were there, the county was there. We came together to say, what if Oakland could be the first restorative justice city in the United States? Meaning that would be the primary way of addressing harm in our communities. And they came up with this beautiful map, right? This map of a distributed network of resources across the flatlands of Oakland, connected into existing infrastructure. And what was amazing, right, through this like visionary thinking, that sort of purple circle you saw, came a new prototype, right? And this is Restore Oakland, and it's the country's first center for restorative justice and restorative economics. It opened just before the pandemic, right? But the power of this place is still happening. And what it is like we gutted this building, right? It's a 100-year-old building in the east of Oakland. And the ground floor is a restaurant that trains low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs and fine dining. That's like a long, complicated sentence. And it has the largest fine dining training kitchen in the country. It has community organizing space, both in the basement and up in the sort of lofty area space where folks are doing incredible work like the Ella Baker Center, Causa Justa Just Cause. And then excitingly enough, it also has the county's first dedicated spaces for restorative justice. So young people are coming here, diverted out of court, the community's coming here, the folks in the building are here, right? And that's all that happens here, right? And they're still writing circles virtually. They will come back into the space once we're out. And so the building of architecture, especially for architects in the webinar, knows how long it takes, right? It's a big and heavy lift. And we were seeing that the need was so great, right? We had to do something that was a little faster. So what we did was we started to work with community on a new concept, a new prototype called the Pop-Up Village. And I would just want to show a quick video because it's much easier to share it that way. So this is just about a minute. So that's our village, right? This is literally a mobile village that brings all these things to community, right? We activate blighted sites, get people access to resources, create beautiful space, support micro entrepreneurs, work on community cohesion, and as a resiliency strategy. And we were able to evaluate this project, right? So sometimes we're like, wow, is the work we're doing having any impact? Is it doing what we say it's going to do? And in this case, it was working, right? The folks were saying that, yeah, the things, I am getting greater access to resources. I do feel closer to my community. Our micro entrepreneurs were making money at our pop-up. And now where this pop-up is being used to support women with preterm birth, right? So we're working with UCSF. So this sort of mobile architecture is very fluid and facile and can change and adapt to what communities need in a given moment. And so I'm part 3 for me in this is really, I keep thinking like, oh, now's the fierce urgency of now, but then more stuff happens. I'm like, oh my God, it's just getting more and more urgent, right? After COVID, after the uprisings last year, things became very intense for us as people started to wake up to the fact that this system is truly structurally racist. When I say this system, I'm speaking specifically of criminal justice. And so I began really figuring we have to amplify the message. Right? So a lot of speaking, a lot of outward engagement so people could understand that we've got to build and plan for a different way of doing justice. And our model became, look, we've got these ideas, right? We'll prototype them with program partners, we'll evaluate them, and then we want to replicate, right? We want to see these in every town, in every city. So everything we learn, we share and open source. And our process also has become critical, right? That we're at a point where we need to ignite radical imagination, and architects, designers, artists, that is our charge, right? That when we engage people with our tools, they move into this elastic mindset, right? Where they're able to come up with new ideas. And we teach, we democratize design, we teach them what we know, right? So that we're leaving behind knowledge in the community as we gather data. And Designing Justice, Designing Spaces was really formed as both architects and real estate developers, right? So we have this close integration of these two in-house, and we always are working with program providers and now with a lot of policy folks, right? So the deep integration, almost like an R&D phase that gets us to the new prototypes in a really thoughtful way. And so throughout these years, we've really started to look at 3 buckets of work that we believe are the infrastructure we need to end mass incarceration. And I'll just show you a couple examples in each one. For restorative reentry, right, we believe in mass decarceration, right? We want to see everybody coming home. But that's a whole piece of infrastructure that we have to build. Often people are mandated into reentry housing and things like that. And in this case, I did a workshop with women, incarcerated women who are released from jail in the middle of the night. And we designed together the Women's Mobile Refuge Trailer, right? A place where when they come out, right? So this is hyper urgent, right? So time matters. And it's also supporting survivors of sex trafficking. Right now, it's supporting unhoused women, right? So it's a place where they can come and get resourced, and it's a refuge where they can meet with a caseworker, get a change of clothes, get some food, right? And get ready to get on their feet. We've also been working on sort of these small prototype rooms. This is our first patent, right? We just applied for this patent. And these are spaces that provide dignity and privacy for men and women coming into transitional housing, supportive transitional housing, which is mandated. Often people can't even get out, right? Because they don't have anywhere to go. Like there's no beds for them, right? So this was a quarter of the price, was designed with formerly incarcerated men and women who also fabricated it at our local community college, right? So how do we help people get living wage jobs through our work? And those units would go into a concept like this. And this is where we're working with Black churches to take their land. This is a church in East Oakland. And they're empty, right? They're losing congregation. And so we can start to take this existing infrastructure and turn it into supportive transitional housing with workforce development in it, social enterprise, and this a form of a cafe with one of our local favorite coffee folks. And so this is an initiative that we are working on nationally. So you can imagine, right? Like everyone's coming home, guess what's left? This stuff, right? We got a lot of this stuff, y'all. There's like hundreds of these, right? I think Team Prison Museum is going to highlight that. You'll be able to see it at that place, I'm sure, where, we are closing these things down. And they're left there vacant. And you know what happens is they get flipped, right? They turn them into other forms of incarceration, whether youth incarceration, we'll incarcerate the women there, we'll incarcerate immigrants there, right? They always find a way to use it for that because that's what it was built for. So some of the work we've been doing is prototyping a pilot process, right, and project to adaptively reuse these kinds of facilities. And we recently completed a process in Atlanta with the mayor's office and community organizers, Racial Justice Action Center, and Women on the Rise, formerly incarcerated women who've been fighting to have this 475,000 square foot monster that used to house over 1,000 people. Now there's like 20, right, especially because of COVID, and turned it into a center for equity. And so what is a center for equity? For us, we were beholden to a task force of 60 people. We engaged hundreds and hundreds of Atlantans, right? And imagining what that would be using incredible amount of community engagement tools that we customized and designed for this process. And these were the 9 things people said they wanted, right? And we see this over and over again. These are the same things that are in the pop-up village, no different, right? Access to food, place for the community to come together, arts and culture, healthy mind and body resources, some retail, right? And that these things need to be co-located in a one-stop shop for communities. We see it time and time again. And we were able to give the mayor 4 great options, right? You can repurpose it, you can tear it down and build something new, you can tear it down and distribute it around the city. And learning a lot about, okay, if we repurpose it, you got to take half the skin off, right? So that you can let light in. You have to demolish these cells. You know, you can't, everyone's like, oh, keep the cells, we'll turn them into artist studios. Like, oh no, honey, they gotta go. The pain embedded in this architecture, I can't tell you. People go in here when we give tours and they cry, right? They cry just because the environment itself is so brutal. So we have to really reimagine it. And this was the community space that the majority of Atlantans asked for. And so the largest amount of our work, right, the biggest body of our work at the end of the day is we have to reinvest in the communities that have been disinvested for so long. So we spend a lot of time developing restorative reinvestments. And one project that we have happening now is our Love Campus in Detroit. The Love Campus is being catalyzed and was inspired by Restore Oakland, right? So a group of nonprofits in Detroit was like, hey, we bought this building. We want to turn this into a multi-tenant use hub with food on the ground floor. Detroit Disability Power is here. This is one of the most accessible buildings in the country. It has Detroit Justice Center, right, serving formerly incarcerated people, Allied Media Projects, right? It's an incredible hub of social justice folks. And next door, what we will be doing is we will be purchasing the lots you see here, and actually we're purchasing 2 more. It's a fast-moving situation. And we're going to create an entire creative oasis for social justice. Right? We're going to look at having the Detroit Cinema here. We're going to have a workforce development kitchen here for youth, education literary spaces. We're looking at a decarceration center. We're going to have hospitality housing, right? So this sort of things like these 9 pathways you saw before, these sort of things that we're starting to see communities need in a one-stop shop is going to happen here. And what's been exciting for us too is to test out some of our new ideas and programs. One is Designers on Deck. Designers on Deck is where we train local residents in real estate and finance and design so they can lead the project on the ground. And on the right, you're seeing one of our first, who is Michael, who is formerly incarcerated. He was incarcerated for half his life. He is back in community, and he's an incredible ally and resource and is learning about real estate and driving our project on the ground. And we're going to be doing this program in every city that we work on, right? We have got to support systems impacted leaders through our work. And so the last piece I just want to share, and it's really emergent. So I'm showing you guys some really emergent stuff because it's important to know what's happening that's really cutting edge. And in LA County, or any of you all calling from there, the implementation of Alternatives to Incarceration report, which was signed off by the supervisors prior to COVID, agreed to and said, instead of incarcerating people, we're actually going to create a distributed network of care. We're going to care for people, right, instead of incarcerate them. And we are currently working with them on strategies 1 and 2 and beginning to develop one of the first prototypes coming out of this which will be restorative care villages. And from that process, right, we were able to take what they had identified as the resources that needed to be built and all our research and have been working on a tool, right? This is our Alternatives to Incarceration digital tool. And what this tool does is it aggregates all the projects from around the country that are happening, tracks that against real world parcel data, right? So you can bring your neighborhood, and this is West Oakland, and you can begin to, as a community, look at the infrastructure that you need in your community to end mass incarceration in the built environment and policing as you know it, right? And so these are real case studies. You'll be able to see how much they cost, right? What programs were provided, how did you get paid for, so you can really advocate for what you need in your community. And we will be launching this as a pilot as well, hopefully in LA County. So I'll leave you with my favorite quote: justice is what love looks like in public, right? Such a different quote than what my father told me, that, together we can really do whatever we want, right? This world around me, I didn't design this world, right? This was not designed by me or for me. And so together, we can begin to imagine something different and frame it through a different set of values. Thank you.
Thank you. That is incredibly awesome. I just want to make sure that the audience knows that there's an opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A channel on Zoom. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to jump in and ask some questions of my own. I feel like a lot of your work is very rich and very intellectual. So what I'd like to do is take a moment to pause and kind of explain and give you the opportunity to explain some of your really groovy ideas in a little bit more detail. And one of the things that I find really compelling about your work is how trauma underlies a lot of the challenges and the sort of design philosophy that you have. Can you talk a little bit about how trauma plays into your work and also how it plays into the daily lives of the people you're trying to serve?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand we all carry trauma. Trauma is locked in the body, right? It's a somatic reality that we all carry. Some of us have more we're carrying than others. And so what we started to discover was, as we started to ask really difficult questions, as we started to work in communities that have been highly traumatized, right? Like folks have been oppressed a long time and disinvested for a long time. They're carrying a lot of trauma in their bodies and they're carrying a traumatized mindset. So, our process is trauma informed, right? So the way that we work is we try to really be thoughtful and sensitive about the way that we're communicating, and that we believe that process will then get us to trauma informed spaces, right? So we do a lot of evidence-based design research study. We do our own research in-house, right? We're working on spaces for survivors of homicide right now, where we're interviewing them and designing for that. We know that if trauma is somatic, right, locked in the body, then the environment is critical to be able to navigate the flight, and freeze responses that we have to anything, right? All kinds of things can trigger people's trauma. I do a lot of study of somatic experiencing, right? The work of Peter Levine. Like, we know that trauma victims are going to be looking out window, right? They need to see where the exits are. Right? We need to have things for our eyes to land on. These sort of sterile spaces, architects like the modernists, that's not trauma informed. That's intimidating, and it's not what most folks are looking for. So that's some of what we do. And my whole team is getting trained in how to work with people who have high levels of trauma. Right? We've got to get trained to do that too.
Yes. And so everyone has trauma, but different people experience more trauma throughout their lifetime, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah. And so by the time you end up in the prison system, you've experienced a lot of trauma. And the sort of solution to that is to experience this really sort of unpleasant facility, which creates more trauma. And so you kind of let that go. And so what you're doing in your work is creating an opportunity for people to enter in and be in spaces that help to heal them. Could you talk a little bit more about your own personal experience when you first visited a prison? Because I think that's really compelling.
Yeah, it was the Chester State Correctional Facility outside Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And I went in to teach with my colleague, Dr. Barb Taves, who's, one of the leading experts on the social work side, thinking about restorative justice and design. I highly recommend reading her research. And, I was scared, right? I was really scared going in. I had never worked with folks who were incarcerated before, so I didn't know what kind of experience I was going to have. And I was devastated at some level, right, Maisie, when every single man who walked in that room was Black.
Mm,
every single one. And I went in with students from the local school, right? It was an Inside Out program, and every single student was white.
mm.
And I'm like, what is this saying? Like, this is just so obvious, right? And they have to get strip searched before they came in. So I became just really devastated,
Yeah.
you know. And the men that I was working with were, I don't know what they did. I don't ask, but my experience of them was wonderful, wonderful human beings.
And it's interesting too, one of the questions from Eric Shaw is, how do you approach your work as a Black woman designer? And one of the things that is like interesting to me is that you grew up in Virginia in a predominantly white community. I imagined as you went to college, there was still a lot of white people around you. And when you have an experience that you're surrounded by predominantly African American people and that experience is in prison, then it must be disorienting, right? Like, are there no parallel spaces where you can have people of color where it's not a space that's full of trauma, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really an opportunity for, especially in architecture where there are very few Black women. You are living your life and you're designing, but you're also code switching in these different environments. And that is emotionally taxing. And not all people have the opportunity or the challenge of experiencing that. So how does all of this inform your work?
Well, I think that, just to keep it simple, is like I just had to start my own gig because I had to be in environments with Black folks doing the work most of the time, right? I work in mostly Black cities. Most of my team is Black or brown. Most of my leadership team are Black women,
Yeah.
right? That there's a way that I'm surrounding myself with other folks of color who want to get this thing done.
Yeah.
And the way that we work in terms of working with the community is very much a Black female led approach in terms of being communal, right? Working directly with the people. Like, it's not a kind of way that I learned in architecture school on how to work with, like how you do the work, right?
Yeah.
We're taught, I'm just gonna do the thing myself and my thing and the ego and all, whatever I know best, and like taking a much more listening and open approach than not knowing, right? And I don't know if that's a Black female thing or whatever, but what I know is it's an entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's like an open mic. I'm also pretty high risk. Like, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work, right? And I have privilege, so I have an obligation to help my people, right? Because I've had a lot of privilege, right? I got to go to great schools. I got scholarships to UVA. Like, I was able to pay for the education, a competitive education, and have the experiences in order to be able to do this thing.
Yeah.
And I want to see more folks, people of color have got to learn how the built environment happens. Instead of having it done to them, they have to be able to have some agency.
Yeah, and it's not just people of color who have to understand how the built environment works, right? If we know that the schools of architecture and the schools of design aren't engaging in a way that is, I'm going to say, communal, as you described, right? That aren't really open to listening, are really sort of ego driven, right? So transformation at the scale that you're trying to bring transformation about would require a change in how people are educated, all people, not just communities of color. And so in your work, especially in your nonprofit business model, it's not possible for you to do this only with people of color. How do you choose the white people that you work with, and what kind of character or values do you look for when you're opening the tent for a diverse pool of partners?
Sure. Yeah, we love our white allies and we need them. So the folks that like I have on my board or on staff have all done their race work, right? Actively are engaged in dismantling internalized racism. We all have internalized racism, so Black people got to undo that too. And that's mandatory. And we also have, we're going to start having staff go through the Pathways to Equity program. If you're not familiar with that program, the program that's really for professionals to be able to undo that work so they can work in community, right? You can't just go, don't just go running and working in community. You might do some damage, hurt people and re-traumatize them. So you have to get trained to some degree, really do your internal work so that when you come in, you don't do harm to anybody.
What does the training look like? What are the components of it? Could you break that down for people?
You know, I will have to send you to their website because I have not taken it myself. I'll just know it's good, and then I see the people going through it, and it's working out for them. But I do know that they work in cohorts, and as they're getting trained, they then do a project in community, right? So there's almost like you learn and then you execute on what you've learned in real life, which I think is great.
Awesome. And Clara was wondering, how is it possible to get involved in these restorative justice spaces and projects?
I mean, you have to understand that most restorative justice programming is emergent still, right? And they are learning, right, and growing around the country. But if you want to get involved in restorative justice, I always recommend looking at the restorative justice programming that's happening in your community. And you can just type in, oh, I live in Baltimore restorative justice. It'll come up, you'll see who's doing it there. You can certainly reach out, you can get trained in restorative justice, a lot of great trainings, and just learn about it. First, just learn about it, right? Don't try to go design the stuff or like think you're gonna solve their problems. Learn about it, spend time with it, really believe it, because I think if you want to design for it, you better be doing it. Like in my firm, if there's conflict, we circle up around it, right? We practice what we preach. So I think the first step, if you want to do restorative justice, is really, hey, do I believe in this way of doing things, this philosophy? How can I live that in my life? You know, and spend time to learn about it. And then you might be able to see like, oh yeah, here's how I might be able to be of help.
And you also have a real interesting nonprofit model, right, for funding these projects. Could you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
That's usually all anyone ever wants to know about, Maisie, to be honest. Like, well, how do you pay for that? Where's the money coming from? So we just set up a hybrid company tax structure. We are a nonprofit that owns a for-profit entity that owns single-purpose LLCs. So that model is really helpful for us because we can bring in the philanthropic dollars. Most of our work right now is philanthropically sponsored. So we make 80% philanthropic or in donations and 20% fee for service. So we do fee for service work. And ultimately the goal will be that we will also then begin to draw funding from our assets that we own, right? That people pay rent and it funnels through and we're able to pass it back through. It's also called a waterfall structure. And I think these sort of structures are becoming more and more common because, you know, stuff's expensive. You got to figure out different ways to finance it. Philanthropy's fickle. They change their mind. We're not funding that this year. You want to be on some stable ground. So this is new for us. And I'm hoping it will work out the way that we plan.
Can you talk a little bit more about how children fit into your design process? And I know that you work with high schoolers and you think around alternatives to suspension. Can you talk a little bit about that and the other ways that you help to engage youth and children?
Yeah, so this is an emergent core sector of our work. So I didn't go through all 8 of the things that we're focused in, but one big piece of infrastructure we're working on are youth spaces. We know that youth have nowhere to go. They just have nowhere to go. So we're working in Richmond with a group called Performing Statistics. We're going to create something called The Hive, which will be a youth-led, right? So the youth themselves will be in a kind of summer curriculum that we're going to integrate with theirs, during which time they will define what The Hive is, what kind of spaces that they need there. And then we will be able to help them even locate and purchase a building for that, right? So we've used our concept development process to be able to develop out these concepts, and spaces for youth have become essential because we're starting to see in some states like California, they're ending youth incarceration. At least that's the goal, right? And they have actually listed, if you look at the Reimagining Youth Justice in California report, you'll see they've identified specific pieces of new infrastructure that have to get built, right? There's a lot of work for us to do, y'all. And people are starting to say, yep, we need 24-hour youth hubs for youth and families. Yep. we need those places. These places don't exist, and we need to create them. So we're working with young people a lot. We're working with Teen Hype in Detroit, right, for their center. So we are very focused on working with young people, and fortunate to have folks on our team who are really great at it. I'm okay.
Well, we have Dr. Ebony Hall in the audience, and she has a very scientific question, of course. She notes that Oakland is one of the fastest gentrifying cities in the United States. And she's interested in your research, of course, and wants to know, has your research looked at how recently incarcerated individuals reintroduced into their community respond to an environment that is completely different from the one they knew before being incarcerated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we haven't had a chance to do that kind of research. What I'm hoping for is that we're going to pilot our mobile refuge rooms that you saw in clusters to see what impact that environment would be having on folks coming through. So that would be part of that. Getting a pilot installed and getting proof of concept is hard, right? It kind of takes time to do that, but I think we're making good progress on that one in particular, and we will be looking to do that body of research. There was a question, she had a two-part question. There was a first part, I don't think I answered it.
I think you did. She was building up to the research portion.
Okay, good.
Ebony, if she didn't, put it back in the question and I'll make sure she gets it answered. Lakita has a question about your project in DC. She's really interested in getting involved as a college student. Do you have any information for her?
So the project we have is actually in Richmond, Virginia. So that's where we're working right now. And, we can definitely look up Performing Statistics. They're a great group. They work with only formally incarcerated systems impacted young people. And they're do a lot of advocacy and arts education work. And, maybe a way to engage with them around that work if it's something that you're interested in. For us, we're at a point where we're going to be teaching and doing community engagement. And if folks have training and are willing to and we need the help, I used to do everything on volunteers, helping out like all the time. Less so these days, but sometimes we do.
Awesome. And here's a really interesting question from Brittany. You spoke about how growing up, your relationship around justice was one of fear, right? And you'd mentioned the courthouse. I'm adding on here. And you also mentioned how architecture can be intimidating, right? And courthouses, prisons are designed to intimidate. Brittany feels that she grew up with that same feeling of fear of law enforcement and crime. And her only understanding of justice was punishment through incarceration. How did you begin to wrap your mind around the concept of restorative justice and to fundamentally change how you think about justice?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember the day it happened, right? It was Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, 2007. I was in the Taylor Memorial Methodist Church in West Oakland. It was all kinds of hot. Everyone's packed in there. Dr. Angela Davis and her sister Fania Davis, great civil rights activists, got up to speak, and they just started talking about restorative justice. I don't know what to say. Like, as soon as I heard it, and as soon as they defined it, that my hair on my arms stood up on end, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is something I can get behind. And I also at the same time heard on the radio a story of Azim Khamisa, and the story of his son getting killed and him becoming close to the grandfather and the man himself who killed his son. Mm-hmm. And that he was able to now work with him, get to know him, connect with him, and now they're working together. And when I hear stuff like that, y'all, when I hear what's possible, what the human beings can actually overcome and do when severe harm has been done, very inspiring. Like, why don't we have a justice system that actually plays to the best of what we can be as human beings instead of the worst of what we can be? And I was committed from that time, 2007, I became super obsessed with restorative justice, and I'm still obsessed with it.
And we are definitely glad that you are. One more question for you. When you think about justice and you think about the role that the police play in punishment and incarceration, have you considered models that may engage police in your work?
Yeah, we talk to everybody. So I want to be straight with it. Even though we're abolitionists and we want to end the police state as we know it, we talk to everyone. So we may even be doing a project here in my county with the sheriff's department around reimagining justice altogether, right? And they're clear, like, y'all might just not have anything to do with the future of justice, right? You may not be part of it. And they're very open to, some folks from the sheriff's department are very open to leading with that question. So, you know, we try to find really progressive people and do pilots with them, right? We don't mess, if you don't share our values and you're not on the same page, it's harder for us to be able to get a pilot done. We'll still talk to you, but we won't do a project with you. So we're always looking for best in class, most innovative folks who may or may not be in government. It just depends.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any plans to create additional women's mobile refuge buses in other countries?
Girl, I get more calls about mobile stuff than you ever want. Like, we're not doing any more. We're not doing any more of those. We'll share the plans, we'll share the costs, we'll share everything with you, but we are not doing much more mobile infrastructure. But so no, not in other countries. The only thing we're doing in other country right now was in Canada. We were advising the Ontario Ministry of Justice on restorative justice centers. But yeah.
So for that anonymous attendee, there's an opportunity for them to help you scale up by taking it international.
Please, exactly. It's what I'm talking about. That's what I need you all to do. You go do it. Here's information. You can do it. You go do it.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you make all of your materials public, right? People,
sure, yeah.
People to grab it and share it and riff off of it and do their own.
Yeah, and like make it better. Like you might make it better.
Awesome. And so thank you so much for your work. It is incredibly inspirational and very important. I can tell you from my own personal lived experience with 2 million people in prison, and the vast majority of those being Black men, as an African-American in America, you cannot live your life without being touched by this issue. And the idea that you are applying these radical design principles to a system that touches so many of the people that I know is not only inspirational to me, it makes my soul happy. And so I want to say thank you. And thank you on behalf of all of the men who aren't here to see your presentation, but you're working on their behalf, and all of the women as well who are stuck in a system and can't find a pathway out. But with your vision for the world, I think that we're building one together. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, Macy.
And I am going to turn it over to Paul from the National Building Museum to wrap up this session for us.
Thank you, Maisie and Deanna, for this important discussion. So much more to cover, and the museum really looks forward to discussing this further with you in the future. Please make sure to check out the important work of Deanna Van Buren at designingjustice.org, and also in the virtual exhibition of her firm's work. Deanna, can you tell us how to access that exhibition? Information that we will also link to on our website.
Yeah, you can go to the College of Environmental Design website, and if you hold a minute, I can look for the link for you.
That's all right. We can also we'll also post it in the recording that we'll do. But if you can find it quickly, that's fine. But otherwise.
You guys might need to post it later. I'll keep looking while you talk though, Paul.
Sure will. Thank you so much, Deanna. And please see the important work that Maisie Hughes is doing. Maisie, would you please share your website with us?
Absolutely. The website is theurbanstudio.org, and we take donations. So.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you, Maisie. And thank you again to Studios Architecture for your support of the Equity in the Built Environment series, and to the Sing Sing Prison Museum for your support on this particular program this evening. And finally, to our audience, this program was recorded and will be made available on the museum's website for you to share with your family, friends, and colleagues. Please visit www.nbm.org and search underneath the Equity in the Built Environment tab. Thank you all for joining us. Good night.